Academic achievement. Academic achievement refers to school success as measured by high grades. Teachers should always remember that there are lots of different kinds of achievements in life. Academic achievement is just one of them. Should we reward students who do well on standardized tests but cannot use the language in the supermarket or at the doctor's? ESL has always done a great job of not focusing only on academic achievement, but also on the actual use of the language outside of the classroom. See BICS and CALPs for more information regarding this. Academic English. Academic English is English vocabulary needed to understand theories and concepts used in education. Now, that can be the grand theories and concepts, or it can be the everyday, starting from kindergarten, words that they need to know. Take an ESL/EFL writing class. Teachers spend a lot of time talking about topic sentences, thesis, chronological order, and other specialized vocabulary words related to that field of study. Outside of a classroom, I do not think I've ever used the term topic sentence. It's not language needed in most workplaces. However, it is language that students need to know and understand in order to be successful studying in a native English-speaking classroom. Just as there are word lists with the 2,000, 5,000 most common words used in English, there is also a separate word list for the most common academic English. An ESL/EFL instructor cannot assume that their learners will know various academic terms. We need to teach the academic English necessary to be successful in a particular assignment or task. For example, collaboration, brainstorming, editing are all words that need to be taught to learners before they start assignment. BICS versus CALP. BICS stands for Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills. So that means everyday conversational language and pragmatics. And you can see pragmatics in Module 2 if you don't remember it. CALP stands for Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency, which is skill in academic language. Okay, so you have the everyday conversational versus academic language. The question is whether someone can be fluent in BICS, everyday conversation, and fail at CALP, academic language, or vice versa, be fluent in CALP and fail at BICS. Of course, either situation is possible. In fact, ESL teachers, not too much of an EFL problem unless you're preparing students to move to an English-speaking country, but ESL teachers should always keep in mind that an immigrant student may choose purposefully to assimilate by becoming fluent in the BICS of a particular subculture, such as skateboarders, jocks, cheerleaders, or school newspaper. If the subculture accepts the immigrant, that's likely more essential to their developing bicultural identity than passing tests at school, which requires CALP. On the other hand, some immigrants may believe that if they can achieve success at school by conquering CALP, then they will be successful outside of class. Unfortunately, that's not true, unless the teacher has done a good job of incorporating everyday conversational skills into the academic English classroom. Bilingual education. Bilingual education is teaching in two languages, usually to learn English while maintaining the L1. In California, there are many schools that teach in both Spanish and English, since the Spanish-speaking population is close to 50%. Usually, students in these schools speak Spanish as their L1 and learn English as their L2. While public opinion is often against bilingual education, the research seems to prove its validity. Certainly, the research shows that using the primary language in the ESL/EFL classroom can speed up the learning process tremendously. Brainstorm. Brainstorm is done alone, in pairs, or in a group, where students generate many ideas without criticism of the ideas. The purpose is to generate as many ideas as possible. Not to generate great ideas every single time, but to generate as many ideas as possible. Many students and teachers fail to brainstorm correctly. Why? Because our natural tendency is to want to sound and look smart. Therefore,
We edit what we say or write before others hear or see it. However, brainstorming should happen quickly without any kind of editing or self-editing of ideas or thoughts. After every sane and insane idea has been expressed, then the greatest idea can be chosen. Trying to brainstorm and edit out bad ideas at the same time will result in fewer choices in the end, which could end with a good idea as opposed to a great idea. Let me try to explain in unscientific terms. Think of that idea in your head as a cap on a bottle. Until the idea on top, the cap, is removed, all those ideas trapped in the bottle can't get out. Sometimes we get stuck on a bad idea and don't want to say it, when instead we should say it as soon as possible so that we can get past that block. You may have to share 10 bad ideas to get to one terrific idea. That's the power of brainstorming. Teachers can grade participation in brainstorming, but they should never grade the actual brainstormed ideas. Communicative competence. Communicative competence is being able to exchange meaning and succeed socially in another language, and to use language functions and varieties well in a social context. Communicative competence is in contrast to linguistic competence or grammatical competence. Linguistic competence is the ability to understand how the language works on paper, the grammar and syntax of it. Communicative competence includes grammatical competence, but refuses to stop there. It adds social linguistic competence, which is understanding the appropriateness of the language in a social setting. So it takes into account things like register. It also includes strategic competence, which refers to the strategies used to get meaning across. Checking for understanding is an example of a strategic competence skill. And while debate continues, most agree that communicative competence also includes discourse competence, which is the ability to coherently put sentences and paragraphs together for meaning. At its essence, communicative competence focuses on the use of language and the ability to successfully exchange meaning using any means available. So, appropriate face and hand gestures would be included in communicative competence. Communicative competence does not ignore CALP, but it recognizes the importance of BICS. Constructivism, constructivist learning, and constructivist teaching. Constructivism is a theory of learning based on the idea that humans generate knowledge and meaning from an interaction between their experiences and their ideas. So the environment uses hands-on experiences to help students learn concepts. Usually. It doesn't always have to be hands-on experiences. It takes the experience they have. Constructivism respects the knowledge everyone has and recognizes that even a teacher cannot be an expert in every area. So students have expert knowledge in areas that can be added to the class and discussions in order to construct shared knowledge in that class. Constructed knowledge is in contrast to the idea that students come to the class as empty receptacles, as whiteboards, clean whiteboards, and it's the teacher's job to pour knowledge into the receptacle and fill the student up, or write all over the whiteboard. This is especially important in adult ESL classrooms because ESL instructors need to realize that not knowing a second, third, or fourth language is not equal to stupidity. Also, having a small English vocabulary may be similar to a first grader, but adults will have an adult brain, experience, and knowledge that puts them in a totally different learning position than children. When teaching adult ESL, it's important to look at your learners and remind yourself that they're doctors, engineers, and businessmen in their home country. They bring a wealth of expertise that can be used in the classroom in constructivist learning. Cooperative grouping, cooperative learning. Cooperative grouping and cooperative learning is when students are learning in teams that are structured to make use of interdependent goals and activities. Cooperative learning is more than group work, at least as most people define it. We all have been in groups where one or more member did not participate, which is why, when asked, most students say they don't like group work. On the other hand, cooperative learning is set up by the instructor in a way that either A, the final product cannot be turned in without the information each member of the group has. Or B, groups must depend upon members of other groups to be able to complete the task. So for an example, information gap activities are examples of cooperative learning. The learner is required to work with another or others in order to be successful. Expectation, though, is not the same as requirement. Just because a teacher expects members of a group to cooperate together in learning does not mean that they will. The teacher must do more than expect. They must plan and organize ways that require everyone to be involved. Cross-cultural studies or cross-cultural education. Cross-cultural studies and cross-cultural education deal with and offer comparisons between two or more different cultures or cultural institutions. So it's a comparison of the cultures and explaining those comparisons or explaining how to deal with or how to handle those comparisons. This is pretty easy to understand, I think. You can see intercultural communication for more context. Understanding cultural differences can make the language classroom a safe, comfortable, friendly, and fun learning environment. As instructors, we cannot assume that ESL, EFL learners already have a good understanding of their target culture, or their own culture for that matter. If you want to ask students to do an activity where they compare cultures, be sure that you have them compare 3 cultures or more, because if they just compare 2 cultures, it can result in us and them mentality, meaning that it can create distance between the cultures instead of understanding. Curriculum versus lesson plan, instructional plan. Curriculum is the set of courses and their content offered at a school or university. Lesson plan or instructional plan is a teacher's detailed description of the course of instruction for one or more specific learning experiences. So specific learning experience, that's the key to a lesson plan. Any curriculum may contain numerous lesson plans. Curriculum is the map. Standards are the destination, and lesson plans are the trips between stops. All right, continuing with this metaphor for a while, I've taken several driving trips where we would stop and check out everything we wanted. That, in the metaphor, is not a well-organized lesson plan. Other road trips have been the shortest, fastest distance we could find between the beginning and destination, which is not always necessary either for well-organized plans. But anyway, those quick travels still had to be broken down into shorter trips where we would stop for gas or other essentials. So the goal was stopping for gas, for example. I suppose where this metaphor breaks down is that lesson plans should have very specific goals in mind and then take deliberate steps to achieve those learning goals. Curriculum versus standards. Curriculum, the set of courses and their content offered at a school or university. Standards, federal, state, or professional organization guidelines stipulating required elements of a curriculum for teaching. Here's a quote that I think explains the difference between standards and curriculum very well, and you can see the web page it comes from. Standards are statements about what students should know or be able to do. Curriculum is the program devised by local school districts, which is used to prepare students to meet standards. It consists of activities, lessons, and units at each grade level, as well as instructional materials. In short, standards define what it is to be learned at certain points in time and from a broad perspective. What performances will be accepted as evidence that the learning has occurred. Curriculum specifies the details of the day-to-day schooling at the local level, and then lesson plans specify the hour-to-hour activities and lessons. English language development, ELD. English language development can be abbreviated ELD. This term is used in the United States to refer to ESL services, usually in K through 12. These learners may also be called LEP students, limited English proficiency, although LEPs include more than just ESL learners. Hispanic or Latino. Hispanic or Latino are generic terms used to denote an individual whose lineage derives from Spain, Central America, or South America. Hispanic and Latino are used interchangeably. However, if you know the gender is female, you may want to use Latina instead of Latino. Also, if you know the actual country the person is from, you should use that term. For example, someone from Mexico prefers to be called Mexican rather than Latino. You can refer to someone from Spain as a Spaniard or as Hispanic or Latino. Intercultural communication. Intercultural communication is the exchange that takes place between individuals of different cultures. It doesn't matter what language is used during the exchange or whether any language was used at all. Intercultural communication is that exchange of meaning between people of different cultures. The average person on the streets considers intercultural communication and cross-cultural communication as the same, simply referring to the meaning shared between people of different cultures. However, as an TESOL student, you should understand that cross-cultural communication is really about comparing the differences in how these cultures communicate. So cross-cultural is the comparison, intercultural is the actual exchange of information. Unless you have a monocultural classroom, meaning everybody is from the same culture in your classroom, your students are engaging in intercultural communication when you put them in pairs and groups in the classroom. This can be threatening for some, since they're already vulnerable learning or perfecting their English. It also means that we need to bring cross-cultural education into our ESL, EFL classes so that we can help learners feel comfortable with each other, which in turn will lead to more successful language learning for everyone. Pedagogy. Pedagogy is the study of being a teacher, or it's the process of teaching and strategies of instruction. The difference between pedagogy and curriculum is that pedagogy focuses on the how of teaching and seeks to improve the process. Curriculum focuses on the what of learning. For example, the curriculum says that ESL students will learn how to write descriptive paragraphs. Depending upon the teacher's pedagogical philosophy, they may spend a lot of time talking at the students about how to write a description, or they may have an activity where one learner describes how someone famous looks in a favorable way using nice language, while the other students guess who is being described. Then, together, they'll analyze why some were easy to guess and others were hard. Then get into a deeper descriptive lesson and explanation. To me, pedagogy is theory in action. Social justice. Social justice is the idea of creating an egalitarian society or institution that is based on the principles of equality and solidarity, that understands and values human rights, and that recognizes the dignity of every human being. What does that really mean? Well, social justice is the idea that wrongs should be righted and that everyone deserves respect and dignity. Some take it to mean that those without should actually receive special treatment in order to bring more equality, to bring them up to the level of everyone else. Mr. Paulo Freire, and I apologize because I mangle his last name, and I apologize for that, is from Brazil, and he decided that social justice belonged in the classroom because he thought it was silly to teach people living on a garbage heap how to read traditional literature. Instead, he taught his literacy class vocabulary and sentences that they needed to complain to landlords and the government. Maybe not surprisingly, he was banned from Brazil for a while. Those in power often feel threatened when the underprivileged learn how to fight for their own rights. ESL instructors often have to serve as advocates for their students. Since immigrants cannot vote, they tend to be ignored by those in power. Since they don't have enough language to defend themselves or fight for more resources, they get pushed to the side. Therefore, ESL teachers find themselves involved in social justice whether they want to be or not. Standard English. Standard English is the form of the English language that is accepted as a national norm in a country where people speak English as a native language. Hopefully, we all know that every country has a variety of accents and local slang. In contrast to that, Standard English is the version of English considered the norm, or the most average. The U.S. does not have an official Standard English, although many people consider the English spoken in California to be the most standard. Essentially, in the U.S., Standard English refers to a slightly formal English that does not include slang, colloquialisms, or other language not explained by grammar and a dictionary. While it's necessary to have Standard English for business and academic purposes, as ESL, EFL instructors, we should accept and validate a variety of world Englishes. Standardized test. A standardized test is a test that is administered and scored in a consistent manner and is designed in such a way that the questions, conditions for administering, scoring procedures, and interpretations are consistent and predetermined to be the same across various contexts. Some examples of standardized tests are the TOEFL, GRE, or SAT. Those are national and even international tests that are the same everywhere they are given. States and local school districts have standardized tests that are, for example, are given to every third grade student at the end of the year. Sticking with third grade as an example, there may be 4 different sections or classes of third grade at a school. Each teacher in those classes likely creates their own lesson or chapter tests. Because these are made by each individual, they're not considered standardized tests, because I can't walk into each third grade classroom and observe the same test. Granted, standardized tests seldom give everyone the same question, but they pull from a pool of questions that have all been deemed equal. Success on many standardized tests requires CALP, which can result in teachers ignoring BICS in the classroom.
Standards for English Language Arts, ELA, versus Standards for English Language Development, ELD. Standards for English Language Arts, ELA, are federal, state, or professional organization guidelines stipulating required elements of a curriculum for teaching reading and language arts to mainstream, and mainstream students are really non-ESL students. However, ESL students are also expected eventually to meet the ELA standards. Standards for English Language Development, ELD, are federal, state, or professional organization guidelines stipulating required elements of a curriculum for teaching ESL. The acronyms ELA and ELD are used in most K-12 systems, but not beyond K-12. ELA refers to reading and writing lessons in the English language, and there are standards that native and non-native English speakers are supposed to meet, which means they are focused on native speakers. The ELA standards don't focus on non-native, even though it includes them. ELD standards, on the other hand, can be thought of as the scaffolding for non-native English speakers that eventually gets them to meet the ELA standards.